But yeah, it's really, really good to be here tonight. Thanks so much for having me along. I just wanted, before I begin, I want to share one wee verse. It's over there in Hebrews 11, verse 1. And it says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And really, before I begin, maybe you're here tonight. I've just been feeling it coming down the road tonight to share that. Maybe you're here tonight and you've been here a couple of nights before. You've heard the gospel and you've heard people sharing what Stephen has to share and David, but you're almost thinking to yourself, well, this is only a bit of a story, and you're like me, and you need to be somebody who's got all the facts, and you need it. And I was just thinking that verse, and it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. Substance is something that you can tangibly feel and tangibly see, and it's the evidence. And when you stand up in court, you don't stand up with nursery rhymes and playbooks. You stand up with something that is evidence, and it's the evidence that I want to come tonight and just share a wee bit about how I came to know that evidence. I'm from Points Pass direction, so I was brought up in a home that was a good home. Mum and Dad were brought up on a farm, sent along to church every Sunday morning. It was a church where it was religion. That's all it was. I never really heard the gospel at all. It was come to church, pay your dues, say your prayers, and you'll be okay. And that's the whole home that we were brought up in, and that's what my mum and dad believed, and all of those things we were taught to do right and wrong, and all of that. They're a good home. But nothing was really real. And it wasn't really until I was about 12 years old that I was sent along then. There's a wee fellowship just across the road from the church we went to, and we went there on a Friday night to get us out of the house. And it was a little youth fellowship. But really there, for the first time, I heard the gospel. I heard that not only did Jesus die on the cross, not only was Jesus a good person, but that he died for me. I heard then that I had a problem with sin. And I heard that I needed this salvation. I heard of the good news. And, I can remember so many, at that young age, there's maybe people here tonight and you're about that age. I can remember just then, sitting in those wee meetings and God just dealing with me. Something different that I'd never felt before. And it was just a voice inside, and it was just striving with me and striving with me Friday night after Friday night. As these men and women got up and they spoke and they shared and had a bit of crack, just like this, I just knew God speaking to me. And I knew that I needed to be saved. I knew it. But I can remember at that age, I can remember one night in particular, it was my birthday. And I remember going home, and I used to say my prayers like I'd been taught to never as way. And I got home, and I just got into bed and I just says, Lord, I know you died for me. I know I need to be saved, but not now. And because I looked at life and I thought, if I become a Christian, I'll become a fuddy-duddy, I'll become religious, and that's not very fun. And and I made a deal with God that night, and I says, Lord, when I'm 18, I'll come to Jesus. When I'm 18, I'll give my life to you, but let me live my life until then. And sometimes we think we can make deals and we come in God's time. Sometimes we think that, you know the gospel, you need to be saved, but I'm not ready. I'll do this my way. I'll do it when it suits. Now it doesn't suit. There's things going on in life, and that's how I was. But it was a couple of months after that, and I didn't realize, but I got into high school then, and the youth fellowship was no longer any fun, and I joined the young farmers and got really heavily involved in the young farmers and everything that comes with that. And for the first, I was about 13, and from that age, I say I was brought up in a good home, but like from that age, every Friday, every Saturday night, I was out in the curb and Band Bridge or in a nightclub or somewhere like that, and that just became my life. Every weekend, that's all I lived for. Tried my best in school, tried to live like I was taught to, but just live for the weekend. Nothing else would do. And there was just this craving and this longing, and there was nothing would satisfy. And it was just, I had to keep going back and going back. And life just became a bit of an existence, being honest with you. It didn't fulfill. You went out and you thought you were having a good time, and the next day you just thought, what was the point in that? But that's how life went on. And I had no care for the things of God. I didn't want anything really to do with it. Didn't take any time really about it at all. And then it was about the age, I was about 17. And I was running about with a couple of fellas in school. And in school you maybe thought I was a good enough fella, but a completely different fella at the weekend. Just a tearaway. Not a very nice person, to be honest with you. And Then I run about with a couple of Christian fellas in school, and there was one of them said to me one night about coming along to a youth rally, they used to call them. And I started to go to these youth rallies with absolutely zero intention of meeting God, zero intention of going to church or doing anything like that. The only reason I was there was for something to do different on a Sunday night, and there was women there, and being honest with you, and that's really all it was about. And being honest with you, the night, and that's where I went. But you know, I went along one night. I remember the first time I went into Aucknacloy, and the man got up and he preached, and I can remember it so clearly. And for the first time since I was 12, God spoke to me. He spoke so clearly to me. And you'll know if you're here tonight, if God's speaking to you, you'll know. And I can remember I said, right, I'm going to get right with God tonight. But at a A-level exam the next day, and there was some guy got up to give a missionary report, and I think he closed about 11:30 or something like that. And the devil just says to me, you have plenty more time. You have an exam in the morning. What are you doing about this tonight? And, you know, that's, if you're here tonight and God's speaking with you, there's going to be a battle going on in your head and in your heart, and there's going to be every excuse through it you tonight. And that's the reality of it. It's the reality probably for everyone who's came to the Lord. And that night I got up and I walked out and I says there's plenty more time. But that's how life went on. But I started to go to church on Sunday nights and stuff got myself a Bible, went with a suit Sunday night. And probably if people seen me get into the church and stuff like that, they thought, there's a fella, he's a Christian. There's a fella, he's a good enough fella. But they didn't see me the night before. They didn't see me pulling out traffic signs on the side of the road or getting into fights and all of these things and just lying, not knowing where I was. They didn't see any of that. And for about a year, I went through living two lives. Playing with life. Sunday night after Sunday, God's striving and God's speaking and going back to meetings and not really knowing why am I going to these places, what am I going, why am I going to a mission, what am I doing all this for, and God's speaking. And I was playing with it. And I want to be honest with you here tonight. You're maybe here tonight and you're playing with life. You know, Andrew shared there about that young girl. I was talking to a fella in work there yesterday, and he's told me he's 40 and diagnosed with cancer. And you know, when things like that happen, the game sort of, the playing and the mucking about stops, doesn't it? But I was messing about, put it that way. But it all came to a head, so it did. And in the providence of God, my best friend, we'd been out one night, he lost his license, and he had nowhere to go, and he began laying in his bed one night, listening to Snow Patrol. I don't know if you know that, not Christian music at all, laying in his bed one night, and God spoke to him, and he saved him on his bed. And he really had a big influence in my life, and things began to change. And but 6 months later, I was out there at the youth rally out at Aucknacloy one Sunday night, and I can remember it. And the man got up, and there's a fella testified, and then the minister, he spoke. And hey, let me tell you, the battle's real. And I remember at the end, he made an appeal, and he says, come on now, who wants to give their life to Jesus tonight? Who wants to be saved tonight and know that they're saved? Put your hand up in the air. He had never made an appeal. I'd never heard this man make an appeal before in my life, but he made an appeal that night. He said, put your hand up. And I can remember, and I was sitting, and my hand was going to go up, and then all of a sudden, I put my hands on my backside. Because I was sitting, and I was thinking, next Saturday night, you'll be standing in the Banville and Banbridge, making a fool of yourself. You'll never keep this. How will you give up the smoking? My mouth was as foul as a sewer. And the enemy just came and said, you're having a laugh. You'll never keep this. You'll be a laughing stock with all your friends. Catch yourself on. You have plenty of time. Do this when you're old. And I can remember that night, I walked out, and there was a fella, actually, he was one of the elders in the church, and his brother was killed that week off a tractor. And he came, and I was talking to him, and I was just giving him condolences about his brother, and he says, you know what, he was saved, and that's the main thing. And he says to me, you saved? And I says, yeah, I'm saved, yeah. He says, well, that's all you need to know. And I knew rightly, I just lied through my teeth, that man. But that night, going up the road, you probably you're closer here than me, coming up the road out Aucknacloy towards the motorway up there, the Granville Road. It's a twisty wee old road, and there was 4 of us in the car, and I was driving, and we were racing on anyway, and we came round one of those bends in that road, and there was a car came towards us the other direction on my side of the road, not in his four wheels, but sliding up the road in his roof. And I can remember it was dark, and I closed my eyes, and I just thought, and I turned the steering this way, and I just thought, this is it. And I can remember it as clear as day, as clear as it happened yesterday. God spoke to me sitting there in that car with my eyes closed, and he said, David, it's now or it's never. And I can remember still, I opened my eyes, and I don't know how we were still sitting on the road. We're on the wrong side of the road. I opened my eyes and looked in the mirror, and there was this other car, and he was just rolling up the road. And I just knew I need to get out of here. And I remember I dropped our gear, and I went to go, and the mates were all, what are you doing? And we turned around and went back, and we got the guy pushed off the road and got him a bit of help. But that night I started to get the evidence. You know, it's one thing, you know, hearing the stories. It's one thing people telling you about the gospel, and people that I had heard for years then, a couple of years, Jesus loved me, Jesus died on the cross to save me. That night it became real. I can remember I dropped them off in Portadown. I went up to the University of St at the time, got into the wee flat, Stramillis Halls, Navan 11. Can take you to the very room the night, just a wee bed sit. And I just got down beside my bed. I didn't have a notion what to do. And I just says, Lord, I'm sorry. And I just said, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm giving my life to you. And I can remember the boys that were sitting next door, and they were playing the PlayStation, and they're banging on the wall at me, are you coming in, are you coming in? And I can remember opening my eyes, and there was nothing fancy, there was nothing special. But I just remember I got off my knees that night, and I knew something was different. Something changed. And I can remember I just went in, and there was just such a lightness. And I just knew there was something inside me, like that verse I read there tonight, faith is the substance of things hoped for, and it's the evidence of things not seen. And I knew that night in my heart there was evidence. There was something inside of me that I knew that I was born again. I was born again. I knew that there was just this burden had gone. And I can remember the next week, and I was just going on, you know, this was all completely new to me. You know, my mum and dad, nobody saved, this was all new, and I was down at university at the time. And I can remember the Saturday night came, and my mates rang me, and they said, we're for the Banville tonight, are you coming? Are you coming? And I can remember that night I just turned around and said, I'm not going. And like, I never thought I could give up the drink. I never thought I could give up the smokes and all of these things. You know, it had just such a grip in my life. Such a grip. But all I can say is this. That night it was gone. I can't explain it, but it was gone. I can remember I worked in a factory out of Portadown there packing potatoes on a Saturday. And I used to run one of the lines, and, you know, the potatoes would come in and into the bags, and she'd clamp the bags that you'd buy in Tesco. She would clamp them shut, and I'd be running those potatoes through. And she used to jam up every now and again. And I remember I used to have a wild bad temper, and the boys, the fitters, they used to be giving off at me all the time, because if she jammed, I broke her, because it was just, you know, should the steel toe cap boot and everything in it, and every curse word under the sun was put at that machine. And I can remember the next Saturday she jammed, and I just frustrated and got her footed about and got her going again. And I can remember straight after it happened, I just realized that was different every other week. The cursing was gone. And, you know, I'm here to tell you tonight, you know, that was the old life. And the Bible says that when you're in Christ, all things become new. And that was the old me. And that was the me that just had existence. And I'm being honest with you tonight, that was 2007. And that was when really my life began. Honestly. I'm not bluffing you about it. I'm not here to tell you a story tonight. That was when life really began. And it's been a journey. And let me tell you something. It's not a bed of roses. This Christian life is not a bed of roses. But I tell you, when you know God, and you can walk with God, there's nothing you can't face. There's nothing you can't face. And it's just incredible, the things that God has let me see and the things that God has let me experience over this past 19 years. It's incredible. People will give a life for it. You know, I can remember my mum and dad. They had no interest. I was doing outreach at the time. Shortly after I was saved, started doing outreach. That's how I met Stephen out in Banbridge. And he used to come home maybe 4 o'clock in the morning. The boys would come rolling down the hill and they'd, oh, well, how are you getting on and all this here. And these are the fellas that I was running about with. And, you know, but I can remember mum and dad saying, you're a madman. What are you doing that for? Sure, keep your Christianity or yourself. That's for church on a Sunday and all of these things. And, you know, there's no time for it. I can remember one night they came and I was testified one night in a meeting and they came. I'd never in a million years dreamt they would come. And that night in the middle of the morning, my dad came in, tears in his eyes, 4 o'clock in the morning. And he just says, David, come and talk to us. Let me tell you, you only think you've life. You only think you've life if you're mucking about. And then, you know, I got married. And Stephen asked me to share a few wee things of this. I got married never as 24. I was 2013. I can remember before that I got a job too. And I got a job as an engineer and they told me, you'll be 6 months in Northern Ireland and then you're going to England. And I was for getting married about a year after that and I said, I can't go to England. I can't live in England. I says, but I'll take the job anyway. I'll do 6 months. And about 2 weeks in, the man came up to me and he says, there's jobs come up in Glasgow. I need you to start next Monday. And I went home and I said, what am I going to do? And I remember the next morning I got up and I just brought it before the Lord. And the Lord, there's just a verse there in the Psalms and it just says, commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him and he'll bring it to pass. And God just put something right in here, evidence. And I remember saying, God, I trust this to you. And I'm just saying, Lord, I'm meant to get married. There's all of these things going on. There's outreach. There's all of these things. And I'm getting involved. And Lord, I'm leaving it with you. If you want me in Scotland, I'll go. But if you don't. And I can remember the very Friday before it was meant to happen, the boy in work rang me up and he says, David, that job's been put off for the summer. It starts in September. And September came, that another man for it. And I never went to England. I never went to England. It was every other man in the work who started that time, they all went. But God just put something deep inside. And then I remember we got married, and my wife Rachel, and we'd been married a while, and yeah, life was good. But then you get to that age and you're just married, and then you think about having kids and you think about having family, and your friends are all having kids and all of that there. And I can remember one day in work, Rachel, she rang me and she says, David, I was just talking with the doctor, and the doctor says there's no children. And hi, that's hard. When you get news like that, it's hard. Especially when you're at that age and everybody around you is kids and it's the stuff you've dreamed for and it doesn't happen. And I can remember we came home and we were praying and all of these things. And then one day I was just saying, Rachel, has God give you anything? She says, funny, yeah, God's just give me a story about Samson, about his mum. You'll conceive and you'll bear a son. And I said, well, take it. And I can remember I think it was the next Sunday, the Sunday after, the minister in church was preaching in the Psalms, and he was preaching Psalm 127. I went home and looked at it, read the next Psalm 128. And the Lord just said, your wife shall be as a fruitful vine at the side of your house, and your children as olives around your table. And I just knew there and then, evidence. Let me tell you something, when God tells you something, it's as sure as money in the bank. I just knew there and then. And I can remember, you know, it must have been about 11 months later, we had a wee boy. And the doctor said there was no children. And with a wee boy, and let me tell you something today. You're maybe sitting here tonight and you're saying, this is all fairy tales. God's not real. I've never seen God work. Let me tell you, I've seen God work. And when you see God work in people's lives, like the shirt, you know, when you see people healed, when you see, you know, when people say that you can't have children and then all of a sudden you have a child. 2 years later or 18 months later, you have another child. 10 months later, you have another child. And you're saying, God, put the brakes on here. There's too many children. Let me tell you, God is real. God is real. I can remember then, like we had our 3 children, so we did, and that was tight going. Let me tell you, it's not a bed of roses. You know, when you've a child at 18 months and then another one born, and then 6 weeks later, your wife comes in and says, we're expecting another baby. And when she's pregnant, she's laying on the sofa sick as a dog. But God is real, and God helps you through these things. And you know, I want to say something. When you trust your life to Him, you can give everything to Him. But then I can remember, you know, and I'll finish, but I can remember after that, the middle fella, he was about 1.5 at the time. And we just noticed we wasn't really talking that well, and he had started to get very, very fussy of himself and been crying a lot of the time. And we thought he was dairy intolerant. The other one was dairy intolerant. We thought it's just the dairy intolerance. We went to the doctors and we seen the pediatrician, and she said, oh, he's maybe lactose intolerant, and he's maybe this intolerant. There's this going on, and they were on a couple of things, and they tried all of these things. But I can remember him still. His face was as white as that sheet, and he had big black marks under his eyes, and he hadn't really begun to talk, and he was about 2, but all of the time he just wanted to sit in your knee and he just wanted to cry, and all of the time, and that's really all I can remember. And we were saying, what's going on? And we're trying this milk, and we're trying, these foods and all these things. And then one night, 19th, I think it was about the 19th of December, 2019. One night, 10 o'clock at night, the consultant out of Craigavon rang us and says, I need to see you first thing in the morning with Jacob. We says, what? And I remember my wife saying, she put it on the loudspeaker, and she says, yeah, the blood tests we've been doing, they've come back and he's got neuroblastoma, which is cancer in his liver. And it says this is something that develops in the womb, and it gets worse and worse, and he's 2 now, and this is serious. And that night our world fell apart. And it's hard. And life still happens when you're a Christian. But I can remember, and we got on to Google, and we started to Google it, and we started to look up, and by the time a child becomes the age of 2, their chance of survival is 30%, and all of these things. And you start looking at all of these things, and it scares the wits out of you. And that was a rough night. And we went to the hospital the next morning, and they brought him in, and she says, right, we're going to do more tests. And then they brought him for an X-ray, and then they said, right, we want him to go for an ultrasound. And they said, look at these blood results, look at these urine samples, look at these markers are through the roof. And then they said, right, he's going for an ultrasound. And so we went down to the ultrasound and said, sorry, the lady's not here. And they said, okay, come back on Thursday for the ultrasound. That was Tuesday. And I can remember we came home, and I was in bits. And we came home, and I just got in the car and says to Rachel, I'm going to work. And I can remember driving down the road, and I just needed to escape. And I went to work, and came home from work, and that night was prayer meeting night in Lochbrickland. And I went to the prayer meeting in Lochbrickland, and we went into the wee room, and at that time we'd printed a wee card, and we'd handed them out around the village. Nobody had responded. The card simply says, what did it say? No answers, Jesus does. And I can remember we came in that night, and we were sitting and we were praying, and there's a man there, and we broke bread, and he was in Isaiah 53, and he was just going through, and he was just speaking, and after it, I just says, here, guys, this wee card's for me. No answers. And we shared with the folk anyway, and I can remember that prayer meeting, and everybody, just the support of everyone, and everybody was just broken. But just as people started to pray, I just looked, my Bible was open, and I just looked down at my Bible, at Isaiah 53 was open, and I just looked there, and there's just a little verse in Isaiah 54, and it says, all your children shall be taught of the Lord, and great peace shall be upon your children. And just like God had given me that verse in the Psalms, the time when he told us we'd have children, God spoke to me there and then, and he says he's healed. And I can remember, I shared with folk, and I just started laughing in the prayer meeting. I'm sure they thought this boy's off his head. And I just started laughing, and I says, he's healed. And I can remember specifically that night, driving down the road to Lochbrickland from Points Pass, when I went to the prayer meeting, the tears blinded my eyes, but going home I was laughing, and I can't explain that. I cannot explain that. And I got in beside him, I went home, and I just went in with a wee bit of oil, and I just anointed him. And then I got in beside my wife in bed, and she was in tears, and I says, God healed Jacob. She said, what? But she knew, because it had happened before. And I can remember specifically, my sister texted me, and she says, so sorry to hear about Jacob, we're praying for you. And I says, you don't need to pray, God's healed him. And I wasn't being cocky. But when I say, God says in his word, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And God will give you evidence. And yeah, I can remember my brother-in-law that Thursday morning we went for the scan. And I'm going to close here because I'm taking too much time. But the Thursday morning before, he sent me a wee verse in Isaiah 41. And it says, fear not, I am with you, be not dismayed. But I just read on down, and it says, behold, all those that were incensed against you shall be ashamed and disgraced. They shall be as nothing. All those that strive with you shall perish. You'll seek them, and you will not find them. Those who contend with you, those who war against you, shall be as nothing, as a non-existent thing. And I just knew. and that was about 9:30. We had to be there at Craigavon Hospital at 11. We went to the hospital, we got in, and the woman got the wee ultrasound yoke going. She scanned Jacob. She scanned him for 45 minutes, and she says, "What am I looking for?" And we said, "He's neuroblastoma, something on the liver." And she says, "There's nothing on the liver." So we went back to the paediatrician, and she says, "That's not right. He's got it. That's not right." And she said, "Right, we're booking you in with the head, well, I don't know, radiographer, whatever you call the people." And she says she's going on holidays, but she's booking you in for Boxing Day. And she wants to see you on Boxing Day morning to get this put to bed. And she went in and we scanned, and she scanned them again and again. She says, "There's nothing there." And then they went back and she says, "I'm still not happy." And so she ran the bloods again. She says he's going for an MRI. And I remember they told us he's 35 minutes he'll be in the MRI. I can still remember, it's not a very nice thing bringing your wee boy, and they say, "Right, blow up the balloon for him," and he watches the balloon, and they put the mask on, and he's out cold in your arms, and you just say, "Give him to me." And you give him over, and they took him for the MRI, and 35 minutes came and went. And we were there about an hour and 20 minutes, and I was pacing the floor, and I said, "What's going on here?" And then they said, "Come on over, come on in." And they said we scanned him, and there was nothing there, so we decided we'd just start to scan at the top of his head and run right down to the bottom of his feet. And there's nothing at all. And see, when God speaks in his word and gives you something, it's true. You'll seek them and you'll not find them. You'll search for them and they'll be as a non-existent thing. And that's what God said. And, you know, I'm finished tonight. Let Stephen or the guys come and worship. But what I say is this. Jesus says in his word, "These things are written that ye may know that you have eternal life." You're maybe here tonight and you're hemming in your hand and you don't know, and you think this is fairy tales, and you think, well, these people are only wishful thinkers. I'm being honest with you tonight. I'm not a wishful thinker. But I know tonight, if I was to drop on that ground, I know where I'm going. I'm not guessing, I'm not wishing, but I know. And tonight, if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, you can know. I was just looking at the wee sign coming down the road in there. But how to get to heaven? Let me tell you, you can know tonight if you're saved. You can come and you can give your life to Jesus. You can experience the love of God. You can experience the full benefits and the full outworking of the cross in your life, in your family, in your home. And so, yeah, thanks so much for listening, but I just really want to encourage you. I'm a man of I want to know the facts and things, not here to dilly-dally. But one thing God has taught me over the years is this. If you get real with God, God will get real with you. He'll get real with you. But you've got to do it, no mucking about, no games, no nothing. Lord, here's where I'm at. Lord, I'm coming, I don't know what I'm going to do, but here I'm giving my life to you. And when you do that, God gets real with you. This faith, this evidence, God puts it down in here. And you can know it you're saved. You can know that you're born again. Thanks so much for listening.